I'm sure. Give me a second.
He's chomping on his vegetables.
His cookies.
Riley, you gotta eat healthier, man.
Yeah, you're right.
H E
I had
L.
broccoli earlier. I'm good.
Hey everyone, my name is Jake, and welcome to the 42nd episode of Good Timin. As always on this podcast, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite bands, the Beach Boys. And on today's episode, we're going to be jumping ahead a few years in the group's history and covering an album that is both pretty unique and influential, but also somewhat divisive among fans because of the history surrounding it. Of course, the record that I'm talking about is the group's 12th studio album, Smiley Smile, from 1967. And as usual with our album discussion episodes, we're first going to go over a bit of the history behind the album and talk about how it came together. And then we will discuss each of the tracks one by one and share our own thoughts and opinions on them. And then at the end of the episode, we'll also discuss a couple of other recordings that the band made around this time. And then to wrap up, we'll talk a bit more about the commercial and critical reception that Smiley Smile received, which was pretty mixed to say the least. With me tonight, I have my good friends Riley and Matt. So as always, I'm happy to have you guys here, and I'm excited to discuss this somewhat complicated album with you both. Before we get into some of the history surrounding Smiley Smile, do you guys have any general thoughts or feelings about the record that you wanted to share?
So for me, I know you mentioned it's divisive. Personally, I'm a big fan. What I really like about it is it's pretty stripped back. The harmonies are the forefront. It's kind of like getting like a back to basics for the group. I really like some of like the kind of more ambient-y tracks, like your Fall Breaks and Back to Winter, Woody Woodpecker Symphony. I really like that. Like this kind of was like almost like proto bedroom pop, which I know is like super big now. And this was like in 1967. And my scorching take is I've always liked this better than Smile. I know that that's something that makes me very popular in certain aspects of the fandom, but I don't care. I really like it a lot. I probably wouldn't put it like in my top five albums, but it's definitely in my top 10 Beach Boys records.
It's a grower, not a shower. Um, Seriously though, I used to kind of not be a big fan of it, and I wasn't really a huge fan of like the Smile stuff either. Still not. I mean, actually, that's not true. I like quite a bit of it, but it definitely grew on me over the years. I love the songs I love on here are some of my favorite Beach Boys songs ever. The song, I don't think there's like any song I hate. There's just ones that I don't really care for. But if more than anything, I do really like the vibe to it. I definitely like the stripped backness to it. And I think, as Matt said, it was very influential. I think this one, because I do like some of the other like lo-fi ones they did better. In fact, I like both of them better. But yeah, I'd more than anything, it's really great just for its influence alone. It's really bold move to go from the orchestral shit on Pet Sounds and then 180 and just go with Little Pad and She's Going Bald, thematically and sonically.
Yeah, so in terms of my thoughts, like a lot of the other albums in the Beach Boys catalog, this one's definitely been a bit of a grower for me over time. I remember the first time that I listened to the full thing, there really wasn't that much that I connected with outside of Good Vibrations and maybe like one other song. And really, the rest of it just felt kind of like half baked to me and a little bit disjointed. It just didn't really click with me in the way that some of their other material did from around this time. I will say there's several tracks on here that I'm not that crazy about. In particular, a couple of the Smile re-recordings. But over time, this album has grown on me quite a bit, and I now do appreciate quite a bit of the material. I do like the kind of trippy and laid back sound that most of the record has, like Matt mentioned, as well as some of the creative arrangements and the experimentation on some of these songs, like on Little Pad and She's Going Bald. But then there's other songs where I feel like the stripped back arrangements actually let them down a bit and prevent them from being as good as they could have been. But yeah, overall, I think Smiley Smiles is a pretty solid album, and I do appreciate how unique and different it sounds from both the band's previous albums as well as a lot of other music from the time. But that said, there's still only a handful of songs on it that I really come back to often. So for that reason, I would say it's probably my least favorite of the group's late 60s albums. So
Really interesting. I think for me, my least favorite late 60s is 2020.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, I would say that 2020 is probably it's the least cohesive album, I would say, of the group, because that one is kind of like, it's a mishmash of material, where like this one probably from start to finish is more cohesive than that album. But looking at the track list, there's more on 2020 that I find myself coming back to than on Smiley Smile. There's some tracks on Smiley Smile that like I just do not really listen to much at all. So
If I look at it, Smiley Smile and 2020 are literally neck and neck on my list. It's
oh really?
I think
close. They kind of both are mishmash albums when you really look at them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
this for me just
Um,
kind of hangs together better than 2020 because 2020 is just all over the shop. It just goes from like
yeah,
one.
thematically, this one kind of with all like the crazy concepts, they kind of fit together more. But I think some of the highs on 2020 are higher. Although I don't think any song on 2020 can beat Little Pad for me.
Mhm.
All right, so now to get into some of the history behind Smiley Smile, I'm going to hand things over to Matt. So, Matt, do you want to talk a bit about some of the events that led up to this album and where Brian and the rest of the band were at this point?
Sure. So in 1966 they dropped Pet Sounds, and then right after was Smiley Smile. Okay, a little bit more to it than that. Um,
No, there's not.
so basically, after the release of Pet Sounds, so that album got mixed reviews in the United States. And it did okay on the United States album charts. It got about, I think, number 10, which was okay, but not great. In the UK, that album got critical acclaim and a ton of commercial success. This was really for them. I would say that when Pet Sounds came out in the UK, that was the first album for them that like people really saw them as like on par with the Beatles, overseas at least. So Brian continued his work on Good Vibrations. That song had become the most expensive single ever recorded up to that point in time, and really it was unlike any other pop song of its era. Derek Taylor, the band's publicist, dubbed it a pocket symphony because, as you know, there's like the different sections of the song that like are not really congruent, but he just kind of makes them work together. So Good Vibrations was released on October 10th, 1966. It was an immediate hit. It peaked at number one on both the US Billboard charts and the UK record charts. And that December, actually, the readers of Enemy magazine voted the Beach Boys as the world's best vocal group, ahead of the Beatles in second place, the Walker Brothers in third place, the Rolling Stones in fourth place, and the Four Tops in fifth place. So that was really a huge achievement for them because, like, you know, the Brits even thought that they were doing better than their own homegrown band. And the Brits have always been, you know, super proud of the Beatles. So around the same time as all this is going on, maybe a little bit earlier, Brian began work on Smile. So Smile is a concept album drawing from a wide array of sources and musical styles. Brian dubbed it as his teenage symphony to God, and he intended that the final product of Smile was actually going to surpass Pet Sounds. Like he expected this to like be even better than Pet Sounds. I think Dennis even said like once you hear this, you're gonna say Pet Sounds stinks or something like that. So Brian's main collaborator for the Smile project was Van Dyke Parks. Van Dyke Parks was a child actor who found himself associated with the West Coast music scene after dropping out of college in 1963. One of Van Dyke Parks' first musical projects was actually the arranging of the Bare Necessities for Disney's Jungle Book. And I know Van Dyke was not a huge fan of the Beatles at all. I think he thought they were awful. In general, I think he basically said he wasn't super impressed with a lot of what was going on in pop music at that point in time outside of the Beach Boys.
Called them the like the British interlopers or something.
Something like that. Yeah, he was not impressed. And there were quite a few Americans that actually didn't really like the Beatles. They're like, you know, hey, go back to where you came from.
Yeah, 1776.
Basically, so when it comes to Van Dyke Parks, his oblique and esoteric lyrics caused a rift between members of the band, particularly Mike, who questioned the commercial appeal of the material that they were writing. Probably the most infamous example of this being Cabanescence, where Mike just could not stand that lyric over and over. The crow cries uncover the cornfields. I think even almost 30 years later, when they're recording Summer in Paradise and Vampire Cross on there, he's still asking him what the hell does that actually mean. Mike just did not get it at all. But
It's
Mike
also pretty funny. It's also pretty funny that Van Dyke was still doing instrumentation for Summer in Paradise.
honestly, yeah, that is pretty damn funny.
Right? Yeah.
Furthermore, I would say Brian's mental health had started to deteriorate around this time. There was quite a few events that were going on. Probably the most notable was during the recording of Fire. A building from across the studio had burned down, and that frightened him, and he just like threw out the track. So he spent all this time and money on this track and just threw it out because he thought that had caused the fire. There was a rumor that they had actually burned the tape, but obviously that's not true because we've all heard it. Also, Brian's tracks at this point in time has started getting more and more complex. He just kept trying to record more and crazy arrangements and all these like, you know, recording techniques that really the technology just wasn't really there at the time. You know, at the time, basically when you had to splice tape together, and the stuff he was doing is stuff that you could only think that you could do with modern digital audio workstations. So I think that was just another factor. Capitol themselves were getting very anxious about this project being delayed because it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And obviously, you know, that they keep spending more and more money on this and they have nothing to show for it. So Brian was trying to complete Heroes and Villains to appease their demands as the first single. Also around this time in early 67, Carl had gotten a draft notice, and we'll get more into that in a little bit, what happened with that, but he got a draft notice for the Vietnam War. Van Dyke Parks had received a contract with Warner Brothers Records. So as a result, at this point in time, he couldn't help out Brian as much. And I believe he ended up leaving the project or was fired from the project eventually. Like he just was done. Like it was just Brian's behavior had gotten so erratic and he wanted to focus on his own material. Also around this time, the band sued Capitol for neglected royalty payments. And they had, in the lawsuit, they had tried to get out of their contract early because they were just tired of Capitol. Not long after, all around this time too, Brian moved to Bel Air and he began constructing a home studio. And that is where a lot of not only Smiley Smile, but also Wild Honey and Friends would end up being recorded. By mid 67, the album was Smile was estimated to be about 50% done. I think Dennis had told a reporter that. And then it was just scrapped. Basically, it was a lot of different factors. Brian's mental health. Most of the band members didn't like the material. I think even Carl didn't care for it. The fact that, you know, like Van Dyke Parks was gone, so Brian felt he really couldn't do the lyrics to his ability. And it was just one thing that led to another. And ultimately, the project ended up getting scrapped. And probably one of the biggest mistakes the Beach Boys ever did in their entire career was around this time. They had canceled an appearance at the highly influential Monterey Pop Festival. Now, Mike has gone on record as saying the reason they did that was because since Carl had resisted the draft, he was going to get arrested if they went on stage. But regardless, this was a huge mistake because this festival is largely credited with kind of launching the counterculture movement in general of the late 60s. And they just ended up looking really square because of it. And a lot of like the writers of like very influential magazines like Rolling Stone and Cream and all those publications were at this festival. And they started in earnest after this festival. And by the Beach Boys not showing up, to the rock press, it meant, hey, they're lame, they're has-beens, they're past their time. So that was a huge mistake. And I think Rolling Stone had even said that that was one of the biggest mistakes ever in music history to not play Monterey Pop. And I'll be honest, I would argue that to an extent, the Beach Boys have never really recovered from that, even to this day. I don't think they get the respect that they probably deserve by some people because they didn't do something like that. And
they lost their hip credit. Yeah.
They lost their hip cred. And Rolling Stone, as stupid as it sounds now, was very influential back in the day. Paul McCartney was a great example that because Jan Wenner blamed him for breaking up the Beatles, Rolling Stone wrote terrible reviews of all of his albums originally. And again, he got seen as like the lame granny songwriter because of that, silly love songs. But anyway, rising from the ashes of Smile is Smiley Smile. So as you mentioned, Jake, that's a reason why this record is so polarizing because first of all, not only is this record for a lot of people the ultimate what could have been because it rose from the ashes of Smile, but also this record just, you know, came at such a low point at like kind of the beginning of the low point for the Beach Boys, and it wasn't a massive hit either. So there's a lot of people that feel that putting this out put them even further on the back burner. But we'll get into that. Anything else you guys want to add?
I don't know whose idea it was. Maybe it was Carl's. He kind of rallied, I think, everybody together. And I think it was his idea to make it really stripped back.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the songs were re-recorded with like a cappella, bass, and organ,
bongos a little bit on a
like very little instrumentation. And I think they also took other songs that were from the Smile project and more than like Vegetables and Fall Breaks and Back to Winter, but also like snippets of songs. I think like Little Pad was Tune X. I think She's Going Bald was like
he gives speeches. Yep.
But yeah, they re-recorded basically like a lot of the songs for Smile and finished up some of the other ones. I think they also recorded some of them like in Brian's swimming pool. I think Little Pad was recorded there.
They said that with like the limitations of the studio, which like had just been assembled, and it was kind of bare bones compared to like a lot of the professional studios that they've been recording in. They had to kind of experiment with like recording in different places around the house, whether it was like in the swimming pool. I think I read that they recorded once in the shower, which is kind of funny. So they were kind of experimenting with different things. Like Riley said, it was very stripped back instrumentation. I know I read that Brian became obsessed with the Baldwin organ, which you hear prominently throughout this album. I guess he was really into that. And yeah, from what I've read from other members like Carl, basically this was kind of a way for Brian to make kind of a laid back and easygoing record that wasn't going to be as overwhelming and stressful as, the massive project that he had been working on with Smile. So in that regard, I think, it was probably a good thing for Brian to do this and do a more stripped back version of Smile, even though obviously the response was pretty polarizing at the time. A few other quotes that I wanted to share that I wrote down about this album. Dennis Wilson remembered it as being the most fun thing we ever did, which I thought was an interesting quote. Al said that we never abandoned Smile, we just stopped doing it, and then we started over again with Smiley Smile. It wasn't big decision time, at least I didn't hear anything about it. We re-recorded some of the Smile material in a simpler way, a folksier home-style way without all those bells and whistles. I wasn't happy with that because I liked what we were doing. It was too bad we couldn't finish the original tracks. It was disappointing, let's put it that way, because I really liked the direction we were going in. But who am I to say, because Brian had to live with it. So yeah, those are just a few quotes that I wrote down. And then one other thing I wanted to mention too is that this is kind of the album where Carl really does start to step into more of like a producer role. Brian said that this was the point where like he started leaning towards Carl in terms of helping him in the studio. He said that he had helped him a little bit with producing Party as well. So, but this was kind of the album where Carl really started becoming more involved in the Beach Boys production. So, and obviously from this point on, Carl had a massive role in the studio in terms of producing the Beach Boys albums. So just thought that was as well.
Carl also said like that famous quote where like Smile was a home run and like this one's the bunt.
That's right.
Yep. Yeah. I want to say too, if you look closely at the liner notes, this is the first Beach Boys album that was actually the production credit was given to the Beach Boys rather than just Brian Wilson. And I believe that every Beach Boys album would be credited to produced by the Beach Boys. Well, other than I know 2020 is like track by track. It says who produces each track. Barring that, every record from here through Holland would say produced by the Beach Boys. And then, of course, 15 Big Ones would be the first album that would have produced by Brian Wilson at that point in time in about a decade. And yeah, so that definitely, I think this is kind of like indicative of, like you said, Jake, Carl kind of stepping up to the plate. And I would also say, too, like in my mind, I think the reason they probably were recording in like the bathroom or whatever, probably they wanted to get like all the reverb and all that because they were used to recording in those studios that had the famous
pool. Yeah,
and they didn't have the resources at the Brian studio at that point to do any of that stuff, So
nope. But like I said, in a way, I think that also kind of helped make the record influential because nowadays there are tons of people that just record in their bedroom or in their house, and yeah, so. That's cool.
Man, I gotta ask, is that the Analog Productions one?
Yes, it is.
Does it have a gatefold?
It does not have a gatefold. No, it's just a plain yeah, the Pet Sounds is a gatefold. Okay. Yeah. Do we want to get into the songs, gentlemen?
One other quick quote I just wanted to share real quick because we were talking about, how it was so unique for the time to be kind of doing this like home studio recording type album. Bruce had a quote. I read this from the Beach Boys book that recently came out last year. He said, I assume for Brian, it was a softer landing to work in his home. It's possible that Smile scared him and that downsizing to Smiley Smile gave him a comfort zone. I have memory of Marilyn, Brian's wife, who would endlessly chase us all out of the kitchen, berating her huge fridge. I just thought that was a funny quote from Bruce. Just picturing guys recording in the studio and then going up to the kitchen to just grab food. It's just funny to think about. So.
And that was, I imagine at the time, that was pretty like unheard of because nobody had studios in their houses back then.
Pete Townsend was working on one. I know that. Yeah. But that's about it. Actually, I think I remember him saying something about Brian Wilson's in his autobiography.
He likes this album, I'm pretty sure I read.
Yeah. Well, we will get into bands that sound a lot like this album later. But, Jake, are you ready to start with the...
Yeah, let's do track by track, yeah. All right, so Smiley Smile kicks off with Heroes and Villains, which, of course, is one of the proposed Smile tracks and was also the first single from this album. So, of course, this is a Brian and Van Dyke Parks composition. The main issue with the Smiley Smile version for me is the pretty muddy sound quality and the fact that there's certain parts of the song that are missing that I really like from the Smile Sessions version, particularly the In the Cantina Margaritas part. I really like that section of the song, and I wish that it was included here on the final release version. That said, I can see like why that wouldn't have been released as like in the single form. That would have been too long of a single. I can see the public kind of being like really weirded out by that. So I can see why it was dropped, but I do wish that at least for the album version they had kept that because I think that was really cool. I also really like the little outro section in the original Smile recording with the strings and harmonica at the end. I wish that had been included as well. All that said, though, I do think that this is still a great song at its core, and I can see why a lot of people view this as one of Brian's last true masterpieces. It is a really cool track, both musically and lyrically, and I also think that the vocal arrangements on this are some of the best in the Beach Boys catalog. And yeah, I do think it's a great song, but I do find the Smiley Smile version a little bit disappointing, especially when you consider how much time and money Brian had originally put into perfecting this song. The fact that it came out sounding as muddy as it did on here is definitely a bit disappointing for sure. So what do you guys think of Heroes and Villains on Smiley Smile?
So, Heroes and Villains is definitely a song that's grown on me a lot. It never used to do anything for me. I just
Me
thought
too. Me too.
whatever. I quite enjoy it now. I do think the vocal harmonies and arrangements are great. I do agree. I do miss the in the cantina margaritas keep the spirit high. First of all, because I really like the way that that section sounds. Second of all, I think that's a really freaking awesome lyric. But I still think it's a really, like you said, it's a really good song at its core. But I do know that, yeah, this is a bit muddy sounding, and definitely sonically not up to par, especially with what we were used to, both the Beach Boys had done, but also what we heard as of the aborted Smile stuff. As it stands, though, I still think it's a really good way to start off the record. It's still a great song. And I do want to say one thing. The story goes that Jimi Hendrix, upon hearing this, said, I can't stand this song. It sounds like a psychedelic barbershop quartet, which I think is a pretty apt description. But yeah, I quite like it. But I do agree. I do think the Smile version is better. But I still like it. And I think it's a great way to start off the record.
I've actually always liked this one. This is one of the first songs I listened to in the greater catalog of the band. I also knew it from Fantastic Mr. Fox, which was pretty pivotal in me liking this one. Yeah, I've always liked this version, and I actually I agree with the cutting of the cantina part. It is I do love that part, and it's my actually what makes the Smile version better for me. But in terms of releasing a pop single, I think that was smart. I think it for the casual audience, it kind of ruins the flow for like a casual fan. Whereas us diehards love it, and I do love it in the song. I think it makes the song better, but in terms of releasing a pop single, that was smart. But yeah, it's a very nostalgic song for me from Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I've always listened to this version. It took me a while before I found the Smile version, and even then, like I didn't even realize the Cantina part was in there for like a while. I just never really noticed it. But yeah, I love the vocals on this. I think that like I mean Jake said it was like one of the most like some of the greatest vocal parts ever written for like for the Beach Boys. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this one. Always liked it, and I always like a good Western theme in a song. Ballad of Billy the Kid.
Mm-hmm.
Billy
Rocky Raccoon.
Joel.
Do you like Rocky Raccoon from the White Album?
Rocky Raccoon by the Beatles. That's Paul one, right? No, that was John because that's Yoko in it. Paul.
No, that's a Paul song, I think.
Can you put Yoko in it?
No, you're thinking of that other one that has Yoko in it.
Bungalow Bill. I do like that one too.
That one's good too. Bungalow Bill, yeah.
Silver Star by the Four Seasons. So I always like a good Western theme, and I think this one takes the cake as the best one. I love this song.
And Wes Anderson, really good with the soundtrack selection of his songs. There's
movies. 3 Beach Boys songs in there, and one of them is the outtake "Old Man Rivers." So.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to say about this song before we move on to the next track. I can honestly see why this didn't chart particularly high, even beyond just like the sound quality not being as great as like a lot of their other singles from around the time. I also just think like you compare this to Good Vibrations, and like I feel like lyrically the subject matter isn't as relatable. You know, it's just not as accessible, I feel like, to the public. Also, you had like kind of the abrupt transitions where you have like this real like fast verse section and then it just stops, you know, before it goes into the kind of psychedelic sounding heroes and villains. I think that that's pretty cool now, but that did take some time to grow on me. And I think I've read before that even Bruce has said before. Bruce said something like, yeah, people would be like dancing to the song. And then you get to that part and it's like, oh, what do we do now? You know, so I can kind of see why this didn't chart super, super high. That said, it still did reasonably well. I think it reached like number 12 in the US, which is respectable. But yeah, definitely not as like commercially accessible as something like Good Vibrations for sure.
I like it more than Good Vibrations.
Well, really? As great as Good Vibrations is, it is a bit overplayed for sure because it's like.
Nah, you know, I listened to both of them today actually in the car ride back from watching the movie with my friend, and yeah, I like Heroes and Bones better. To be fair, I also listened to the Smile version, but no, I don't know what it is. Maybe it is just the Western theme, and I'm kind of a sucker for that kind of stuff. Maybe it's nostalgia or whatever, but. I know I like the flow to it, and I really like the different sections of it. I especially like the cantina part. It really slows it down. It's weird. It's like worlds building inside of a song. It's pretty funny. I like the kind of like scene it makes. It feels very lived in. just for being a piece of music, and it's some of my top 10 favorite Beach Boys songs.
I have to say that's a really good description, right? You're saying it's lived in. I've never really heard that used for music. I hear it a lot for like when you watch a film and you watch a performance and you say like it's a lived in performance, but that's a really good term. It does feel like
Yeah, I grew up on a lot of like Western films. I watched a lot of them with my grandfather.
Mhm.
When I grew up, and I really love Clint Eastwood, and especially the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And
Mhm.
I feel like I can really visualize that world when listening to the song, and I can't say that about a lot of songs. So I think
Yeah.
that's kudos to Brian and his just arrangements, and
Van Dyke's lyrics too. I think definitely.
it's definitely my favorite set of Van Dyke lyrics.
All right, so the second track in Smiley Smile is Vegetables or Vegetables, however you want to call it. So this is another song that was originally intended for Smile, but unlike Heroes and Villains, this one has been significantly stripped back in its arrangement on this album to the point that it's almost like an a cappella track. Most of the song is just vocals, bass, and vegetable chomping. There's been that rumor that's going around that Paul McCartney contributed to that, like he was chomping on vegetables. From the official sources that I have read, it's not super likely that he is in the mix. It's possible, but from what I've read, it was more like he just kind of dropped by the sessions. They spent a lot of time on this song, similar to some of the others. I think Brian at one point thought that this was like a potential single, which is pretty crazy to think about. Well, I do think that this song fits in well with the chill vibe of the rest of the album. I do really miss the piano and all the extra instrumentation on the Smile Sessions version. So I can't say that I really come back to this version much outside of the context of Smiley Smile. I also wanted to mention that I used to not really care for this song in general, like at all, and I kind of found it dumb for a while. But it has grown on me a lot over the past year or so, and I now find it to be a pretty fun and quirky track. But yeah, overall, I think the Smiley Smile version is fine for what it is, and I do think that it fits in well with some of the other songs on the album. But I do strongly prefer the original Smile Sessions recording, so I don't really come back to this one often at all.
I really like this one actually. I think that this song does pretty well with the nice stripped back arrangement. I think it's a very like simplistic song. It's a quirky song, and I like getting to hear those vocals up front. And you just have like a little bass. I like that part. The da 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 da. I know that you feel better. I love that part too. I really quite enjoy the song. It's very fun. But the Smile Sessions version is really good too. I will say this was a song that I think I liked pretty early on. It wasn't one that took a while to grow on me, unlike Heroes of Villains. That one took a while to grow with me. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's very quirky, it's very fun, and I love seeing the harmonies up front. I think that that's one thing I really like about this mix, and that's what I love about this album in general. The harmonies are at the forefront.
Sure, give me a second.
He's chomping on his vegetables.
His cookies.
Hopefully the cookies don't have vegetables in them.
Riley, you gotta eat healthier, man.
Yeah, you're right. I had
H-E-L.
broccoli earlier. I'm good.
He's in the great shape of the agriculture. He's fine.
I am in great shape.
You are in great shape.
If I didn't wrestle, I would be in such terrible shape. I'm literally drinking a beer right now.
I saw.
Show a
I'm
good
not
look.
a Corona guy, but my friend got me some before he went. So, yeah, this one's still kind of growing on me. I can't really tell which version I like because I feel like the stripped back arrangement serves the quirkiness for the Smiley Smile version, but the arrangements and the instrumentation on the Smile version are so damn good.
Mm-hmm.
So and for a song that hasn't fully clicked with me, it makes it hard to pick which one I like more. That being said, I think this was cool for Brian to kind of finally write in this direction where he's writing about whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah.
And I feel like oddly enough, if we didn't have vegetables, we probably wouldn't have a lot of the Love You tracks. So
Yeah, that's kind of when I said like I kind of view it as a fun and quirky track. That's kind of what it makes me think of, honestly. It's some of the later stuff that they did, with the quirky lyrics and some of the just like the silliness of it. So that for that reason I can appreciate this track quite a bit now. But yeah, like you said, Riley, I love the piano on the Smile version of this. So like having it stripped back like so bare on the Smiley Smile version. It does feel a bit empty to me, but I also think that it works okay in that form as well. Just not a favorite of mine, though.
also, I'm curious, like if this kind of influenced the Beatles at all, like especially the Smiley Smile stuff, because the Brits definitely liked this album.
Mhm.
I'm curious if like McCartney was influenced to write some of that granny pop stuff, like Obla Di Obla Da, or like Honey Pie, or any of that like stupid shit. If I'm curious if you wouldn't have written any of that stuff if Brian didn't do Smiley Smile and this kind of themes for songs.
So what I've heard is that some people have made the argument that this album being so stripped back and so like just back to basics, this kind of foreshadowed the Beatles' White Album and like, Bob Dylan, all these other artists started doing albums like that, because especially when you compare it to a lot of stuff that came out in late 67, you think like your Sergeant Pepper's, your Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited, your Sertonic Majesty's Request, very like densely arranged, very elaborately produced material. This sounded really out of place for the time, but flash forward a year or two, everything started sounding like this.
I saw somebody described it as a very like unpretentious album, like compared to some of those other.
Yep.
Why it's
Opposite of a neutral milk hotel.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like when you look at like, it's like the albums I mentioned are like very elaborately produced, especially like, Pepper and Satanic Majesty's Request. It's like throwing everything but the kitchen sink in there.
Yeah.
And then Smiley Smile hit, and McCartney's like, "Oh fuck, we got to strip back." Actually, it's funny you mentioned that it was potentially released as a single, because Nate was here. You had mentioned that Jan and Dean released it as a single too.
Yeah, this was yes.
Yeah.
This was Brian was thinking about releasing Vegetables as a single, the original single for the Smile thing, and Van Dyke thought it was a terrible idea because he felt it had
it was
commercial people, whatever.
Going from releasing freaking like God Only Knows and Wouldn't It Be Nice as like a single, and then here's Vegetables.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, Heroes of Villains got to 12. Vegetables would have gotten to like 95. I would have not gotten.
Vegetables would not have charted.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, Vegetables would have been a massive flop if it was released as a single. There's no way this thing would have charted. All right, so track 3 on Smiley Smile is Fall Breaks and Back to Winter, Woody Woodpecker Symphony. So this is essentially like a repeated loop of a fragment from the Fire instrumental, which is from Smile. To me, this track has a very kind of unsettling and almost haunting sound to it with the vocal harmonies and the stripped back instrumentation, which I like. But that said, I do wish that it was a bit shorter. Personally, I don't think it really justifies its 2-minute runtime, given how simple and repetitive it is. And for that reason, this is another track that I don't really revisit outside of the context of Smiley Smile. But in the album, I think it's fine. But it's not one of the highlights of the record for me, for sure. It's one that I don't really revisit that often.
I love it. I think that it works for me, because this for me is like everything I kind of love in music. It's like really creepy sounding. It's got that great ambient feel. It's just the vocals. It's got like the organ going boom, boom. I love it. Personally, this is one that I wouldn't even mind if this was like a whole side of a record, like a Kraftwerk song. I really, really love this song. I think that this is one of those songs that you listen to and it sounds years ahead of 1967. I think it kind of captures the album's vibe as a whole. It's a very paranoid, kind of frazzled. I've seen this album described as like you're trapped in a room with like a bunch of crazy people. Well, this song hits the nail on the head. So firstly, I really love it. I love it, love it, love it. One of the highlights of the record for me.
I'm kind of somewhere in between. I kind of see this as the evil version of Let's Go Away for a While. The evil twin brother. I think it impresses me more than I actually like it, though. It's tough because I think it's a really cool song and it's very cool sounding, but I don't think I ever really put this one on. I do think it's a little bit cooler than Fire, but I don't know if it's really better, because the instrumentation of Fire also impresses me quite a bit. And I like that he's kind of writing in that kind of way rather than his usual like very melodic style. So I think it's pretty cool. So while I enjoyed in the like context of the album, I never really listened to it much outside of it, but it does impress me quite a bit. Although I don't know if I would want it to be a whole album side, Matt. I'm sorry.
That might be me just being a little crazy, but I would.
I want a whole album side of Leaving This Town. You're all good.
Leaving This Town is great. Yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking like, so I kind of it's just like with when you listen to Kraftwerk, like some of their out songs, like it's a whole side and it's like one song.
Oh yeah, Pink Floyd did that too.
Pink Floyd's done that too. Yeah, so I was just thinking like,
very different though. They could be pretty melodic.
What would that sound like? And I imagine it would sound something like this.
Yeah, I think for me, like, comparing this to Fire, like, I think the reason, like, I'm not even like the biggest fan of Fire, but it works for me more in that like there's just so much going on and it kind of builds in intensity as it goes. And I, like Riley said, I'm very impressed by the instrumentation on that. Like, it's so like heavy and just crazy. Where like this, like, I'd appreciate it more, I think, if it kind of developed a little bit as it went, but it's kind of just the same fragment looped over and over again for 2 minutes. If this was a little bit shorter, like maybe it was less than a minute, I'd probably appreciate it a little bit more. But being 2 minutes, I do wish that they maybe done a little bit more with this. It does sound really cool, and I imagine this doesn't really sound like much else that came out around that time. Definitely ahead of its time, like one of you guys said. But yeah, as an actual track, it doesn't do too much for me. But
that's funny because Fire is one that I've never. I don't know. I've always been impressed more by the lore than the song itself. I just think it's too heavy for me, at least for like a Beach Boys song.
Yeah, I don't really view it as a Beach Boys song. I kind of just view it as it's a Brian, thing.
I don't even know what it is. I don't know what it is.
Fire is not a Beach Boys song. That is purely Brian Wilson and the
Yeah, I think also too, like another thing that kind of with Fire and a lot of small stuff in general, I find some of it a little hard to enjoy just because knowing what Brian was going through at the time. Like knowing that in the back of my mind, it's like it's almost like I'm listening to literally somebody going mad.
Like I feel like of all the tracks on Smile, like that maybe is the one that most like represents like kind of Brian's just like decline at that time, like the mental.
also like he said he heard a lot of the stuff in his head. Imagine like hearing that. Like that's
Oh my God. Right. I mean,
I couldn't even.
Oh yeah, but it invented heavy metal.
Well, I mean, if anything,
Shut the hell up.
if anything invented heavy metal, it was
Yeah, shut your dumb ass up, dude. You did not invent heavy metal.
It was Helter Skelter. If anything invented heavy metal,
I Can See for Miles by The Who.
that too. I mean, but something that actually was released.
Something with like, actual guitars on it.
Yeah.
all right. So now moving on to track 4, we have quite the song here. She's Going Bald.
A symphony to Mike Love, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, this is one of the weirdest songs in the Beach Boys' entire catalog, both musically and lyrically. The opening verse melody is pulled from the Smile fragment He Gives Speeches and has lyrics about a girl losing her hair. And then after this, the song transitions into another section where the band used a recording tool that's called the Eltro Information Rate Changer to make their voices become more and more high-pitched to the point that they have that almost like chipmunks sound to them, like the sha-na-na, sha-na-na. So it's kind of very trippy sound to it. Then after that, you have this really frantic spoken word section from Brian where he's talking about trying to salvage the girl's hair and how she's pouring juice over her head to try to make it grow back. And then the track closes with this catchy little R&B section sung by Mike and the rest of the guys, which is honestly probably my favorite part of the song, like the Too Late Mama, that part. But yeah, overall, this is a very quirky and strange track, but it's one that I actually do enjoy quite a bit. Just for how unique and experimental it is, like with the pitch changing and the weird lyrics for the time. And, I think of a song like Caroline No, where the lyrics are asking, where did my girlfriend's long hair go? And in this song, it's more like, where did your hair go, mama? Which is interesting. And like Riley alluded to, there's been some jokes about this song, like, was it about Mike or something? According to Brian, that was a coincidence that Mike was losing his hair around the time that this came out, but it is funny to think about. But yeah, this is both a strange song, but also a cool song at the same time. It's one that I do occasionally listen to outside the context of the album. So, and then one other thing Mike Love said of this song, we were stoned out of our heads. We were laughing our asses off when we recorded that stuff. So.
Oh yeah, I think there was a lot of drugs being consumed throughout this whole record. She's Going Bald. Very interesting. It might be one of the weirdest songs they've ever done, and that's really saying something. Because there's a lot of weird stuff in this catalog. Enjoyable in a quirky way. I will be honest, I've never like outright like love this song as much as some other people. I think it's good. I think it's fun, but it's probably my least favorite on side 1, I would say, just looking at the record in front of me, but I still like it for what it is. I think the phase shifting is pretty cool, where like the vocals get higher and higher and higher. And then like when Brian's doing that frantic spoken word, I think my favorite part is like, I salvaged what she had and threw it in a sock. I don't know. It's just like, it's like him almost trying to be like William Shatner or something. I don't know. It's just kind of fun. Also, I wanted to mention this, that Dennis Wilson thought this song was about oral sex. I mean, Dennis, I think, had that on the brain a lot. But yeah, I do listen to it in the context of the album, but it's not one I would really put on outside of the record. But it's still fun.
Riley?
It's pretty interesting. That's for sure. Yeah, I like a lot. Again, similar, oddly enough, similar to the Fall Breaks and Back to Winter, Woody Woodpecker Symphony. Is I think it's more interesting and inventive than I like actually like it. I think it's a pretty funny song, and I think it's the Beach Boys showing off their humor, which I think is pretty cool. And I'm also pretty glad that Mike Love still seems to like not be pissed off about this song. He seems to joke about it a lot more. He definitely seems to come to terms with his baldness in the recent years, because he joked about it on the show I went to last year, or I guess 2 years ago. Holy shit! Where he was like, "Yo, we wrote a song called She's Going Bald. How about that?"
He mentioned that at the concert you were at?
Yeah, oddly enough, after he talked about fucking John Stamos' mom. Yeah.
Yeah,
it was like after, I think it was between Be True to Your School and I think a song from Pet Sounds. I'm not sure which one.
I wonder how many people that were at the concert actually knew what the hell She's Going Bald even was.
Well, I think he was saying like, oh yeah, and in the mid '60s we got some pretty funny stuff. We did Pet Sounds, which is a song we playing from next, and we also did a song called She's Going Bald. How about that?
I would have laughed out loud.
He's making fun of it more than he is like actually like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he kind of did the same thing with Heroes and Villains when they did it in Hawaii. He made some comment before, like, "Well, this was a flop" or something, and then Brian was even laughing at it. So,
Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty cool, and I like that even like in the weirdest. I think the weird songs kind of allow them to do that some experimentation with some of that stuff where it's like the speeding up of the voices, uh,
Hmm.
and a lot of like the song structure. It allows them to kind of be funny.
yeah.
Maybe that's why Brian did some of them because even though it's a flop, at least you have to try out some of that stuff.
Yeah, I did read a quote that said that Brian intended for this to be, I guess Brian had always had this interest in like making like a funny record, like a humorous like album, like an album of like comedy or something. So I read that he said something like he wanted to incorporate kind of like some comedic elements into this album. So I think that this is kind of an example of that, like with like the really wacky, like that spoken word section, like Matt mentioned, and the phase shifting. And this just sounds like one of those songs that like was probably pretty fun to make and record. And you know that quote from Dennis where he said like this was the most fun we had making an album. That this song I think kind of shows that in a way. So definitely a quirky song for sure.
Hmm.
All right, so up next is Little Pad. For me, this is easily one of the highlights of the album. And it's also one of the only tracks on the record that did not originate from the Smile sessions. I know Matt Riley, you mentioned Tune X might have had some sort
Yeah,
of.
but it wasn't finished though. It
It
was
wasn't
just more like a thought than anything.
Well,
right,
the whole album wasn't finished, so
right.
Still isn't.
Yes,
Well, kind of.
still isn't, folks. But yeah, Little Pad, I really love the really chill and laid back arrangement of this song with the Hawaiian guitar and the organ. And this is also one of my favorite early Carl vocals as well. I feel that his voice really fits this song perfectly. I also wanted to mention that I love the tripped out laughing at the start of the song. The guys sound completely stoned out of their minds, which from what I've read, they pretty much were throughout the making of this album. But yeah, I think it's a really great song that perfectly captures kind of the laid back vibe of the album. And it's one of the tracks on here that I come back to the most. So I've always loved this song a lot.
This is probably my favorite song on the album, not including the stuff that like not including like Good Vibrations or like all the stuff that was like reused. I think this is just a gorgeous track. First of all, I love the intro where it sounds like they're stoned out of their minds and just kind of like was almost keeping the tape running by mistake, which is kind of where I was going to what I was alluding to earlier. Like this is some of that White Album influence. I think of like when you listen to Helter Skelter and Ringo's like, I got blisters on my fingers. So it kind of reminds me of that. And then you just have like like the do do do, the great harmonies. Carl's vocal is otherworldly. The guy could sing the freaking phone book and make it sound good. And it's just a very vibey song. Like I could just easily see somebody like in a lanai in Hawaii strumming a ukulele, singing a tune like this. And I've never been to Hawaii. I know you've been, Riley, but this is definitely something that I will absolutely be listening to Hawaii if I
To
ever.
do it in Hawaii, definitely recommend.
And I will say, too, the other thing is I want to shout this out for anybody who's familiar with Trevor Moore. He was a comedian. They're part of a comedy troupe, and their show is called The Whitest Kids You Know. The theme song to that was based off of this. So definitely go check out the theme song to The Whitest Kids You Know, and you'll hear it. Sounds a lot like Little Pad. But yeah, awesome, awesome song. One of my favorite songs, honestly, probably in the catalog. I just love it so much. It's so like slight, but it's so charming. And I think this was not including Good Vibrations. This was the only song I believe that we put on our like one of best of album tracks. Because I feel like this is one of the few songs that kind of can stand alone.
Right. Listen to it out of the context of the album. Yeah. Yep.
I love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. And my dad loved it too. One time I played it for him in the car. He was singing along.
A lot of my friends like it. This is like one of the Beach Boys songs that I show a lot of my friends outside of the catalog. I think they really like it. Most of them say, "Oh, it has a vibe to it." I mean, yeah, kind of. I just hate the use of that word.
I know.
Definitely recommend listening to it in Hawaii, especially as the sun's setting. That was really cool. That was a really cool experience. I just wish I didn't have that freaking terrible sunburn on my back. Jake, you remember that sunburn I was talking about, right?
It was bad, man. That was really bad.
I was in bed for like 3 days, so yeah.
You showed me too, the sunburn.
Literally had blisters on my back. But dragged myself. I also walked up Diamond Head with that sunburn.
Hmm.
And listen,
The hardest things I had to do in my entire life.
yeah.
As I listened to the Friends album. Anyways, Little Pad, gorgeous song. Probably one of my favorite uses of Hawaiian guitar. I'm not maybe it was a ukulele. I'm not sure, but also just the general like chords being started. It reminds me a lot of. It's like a psychedelic version of Your Summer Dream.
Mhm.
Um, Gorgeous song, really beautiful. Uh, I also love Carl's vocal on it.
Yeah.
That's like lo-fi pop at its best.
Yeah, I feel like when people, talk about this era of the Beach Boys being influential on like kind of like the bedroom pop genre, I feel like this is one of those songs you can really point to and like totally hear that. Like this is the kind of song like one of these really popular like bedroom pop, dream pop artists could cover right now and it would sound really good, I think,
It'll probably be a hit.
Yeah, yeah,
Billie
right.
Eilish did this, it would be a hit.
Yeah.
Eilish or anybody really could cover this song. I just think it's got a great melody. It's
Benson Boone.
Ensign Boone. Oh Lord.
If I only had my little fan.
These beautiful bags that okay. All right, so now let's flip the record over, leave Benson Boone behind, and move on to the first track on side two, which is Good Vibrations. So I feel like there really isn't that much I can say about this song that hasn't been said already. It's a masterpiece of both songwriting and production, and there's a reason that it's remained one of the band's most beloved hits to this day. If I had to pick three of my favorite elements of the song, I would say the really cool electro theremin sound that plays throughout the track. Mike's cool vocal during the bridge, the I don't know where, but she sends me there part. I've always really loved that a lot. And also the really intense and kind of like sawing cello parts during the chorus and at the end as the song fades out. In terms of which version of this song that I prefer, I honestly don't really have a strong preference. I know a lot of people love the hum-dee-da vocals at the end of the Smile version, but for me, they don't really make or break the song, so I could go with or without them. But yeah, overall though, it's an incredible song, and while it may not totally fit in with some of the other like script back material on this album, I can't really blame the band for including it on. It definitely was a way to kind of sell the album for sure. So, amazing song and one of the band's very best.
Masterpiece, one of the greatest pop songs ever written. This song kind of is a good mesh of like a song that is both experimental, but the lyrics are very relatable. I think is something that some of us, I know Jake, you've told me that you kind of struggle with some of the Smile material because it isn't as relatable for you. I think this does it well. Mike did a great job with those lyrics. Cross vocal is great. I want to give a shout out to Denny on the organ. Love that part too.
Yeah.
And it's a masterpiece. I don't, what else do I have to say? It's a masterpiece. It's one of the most influential recordings in popular music history, and it will live on long after we've all left this mortal coil.
Yeah, it's been talked to death, but for good reasons. Kind of like Stairway to Heaven, in the sense that you've heard it 1,000 times, but it's still damn good. Um, and it's also just a cool experimentation from Brian in terms of songwriting. Just in terms of like he wrote the separate parts, and to like the casual listener, they will never notice that it's like really like three different songs kind of put together. It's been granted I'm no Brian Wilson, but it's been pretty influential on like some of the songs I've written and the way I kind of thought about it in the sense that you can write different parts to a song. It doesn't always have to be like one giant flow. And something that really goes undersaid with this song is the dynamics. I love the way like it gets soft and then loud and then soft and loud, and just the way that works with the instrumentation. That kind of all comes crashing out at the end with an awesome sing-along chorus.
Yeah.
The song was great song by the Beach Boys, and I could see why it reached #1.
It almost feels like in a way it was almost designed to be a crowd pleaser because at the end, like you said, there's that real nice sing along section that always gets the crowds into it. So
yeah, and then you listen to like the 1983 version, it's like a 4-minute ending.
right. And one other thing that's interesting too, I believe that this is really, besides Heroes and Villains, this is like the one song from this album that was ever really performed live, right? I'm pretty sure the others were never performed live on here. So as much as I hear a live Little Pad, that'd be pretty cool. But
unless you count, like I do think they did perform Vegetables and Wonderful at some shows around.
Right.
The Good Vibrations set comes out, but I know most people consider those more like Smile tracks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think to kind of go with the bedroom pop though, I don't think they ever intended to do Little Pad live. I think they kind of thought of that. I think they thought less of that one and kind of more as a filler, honestly, than like some
I mean,
stuff.
Here's the thing: if that is what they can just dust off in their sleep and just do a song like that, that just speaks to the talent. That like it's almost like they thought of it as just like a joke, and it came out that good.
I don't think they intended for that to be like a hit or anything. I think they just kind of like put it in there so that it would just be easier to fill out the album.
Right.
Is it the shortest album by the band next to Friends?
It's definitely pretty short. I will say too, though, I think that another thing too is that Carl was very adamant about never going back to the Smile material, even when I know that that had been talked about in the mid '90s, and even he was like, no, because he just didn't want Brian to like have another mental breakdown. So I think like you make a good point that a lot of this stuff is just easy, it's breezy, we can do it, bang it out. Capital gets what they want, and Brian's mental health will be somewhat
Right.
steady.
All right. So up next we have "With Me Tonight." So this song was originally titled "You're With Me Tonight" and was recorded during the Smile sessions, but the band ended up reworking it, like many of the other tracks on Smiley Smile. While I do really like the group harmonies on the original Smile recording, this version definitely feels more complete to me, and I think it fits in better with the other tracks on the album as well. I really like Carl's lead vocal and kind of like the stripped back instrumental arrangement. This song is maybe a little bit repetitive, but at the same time, it also doesn't really outstay its welcome for me either. So I just think it's a really laid back and chill song, and I think that it fits the album very well. And another really great vocal from Carl as well. So really chill and fun song.
Great vocal from Carl, a great vibe. I don't want to use it again, but it's a good vibey song. It's kind of had like that doo-wop thing going on. I also noticed too, if you guys listen very carefully, there's a voice that says good. And apparently that was from Arnie Geller, who is a friend of Brian Wilson's that said it by mistake, but they liked it so much that they left it in. And again, this kind of goes back to that started becoming a trend eventually. You started leaving stuff in that like maybe like, before I feel like a lot of records before this, it was like you wanted to make it almost as perfect as possible. So you
You see
didn't
that with
want
the Beach Boys. There was a little like cough in the middle of Wendy.
to.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The
Yeah,
little like actually Lonely Sea in the stereo mix. You hear that little like spoken part at the very beginning.
Yeah, they're like talking real low. Yeah.
yeah. They probably forgot to clip it or something. But yeah, I like little like things like that. It makes the song feel like more human. I feel
Perfect
like
imperfections, Matt.
that's what I've said, perfect impression. Because I feel like, and maybe this is just me, but I feel like a lot of songs now, everything is so auto-tuned or melodined, or like as Justin had said, it's like snapped to the grid, and you're just trying to make it sound almost sounds like robotic. Whereas like when you leave stuff like that in, it feels more human. But maybe that's just me. Maybe
No,
I'm
I agree. I agree.
This comes down to the digital recording versus the analog recording, I think.
yeah, but
Why I like a lot of Lemon Twig stuff because it's recorded analog and
I don't
it's
even think it's necessarily digital versus analog per se. It's more just that like people are they're trying to strive for perfection. You can easily do this in digital too. They just want to clean it up and make it sound like it's the auto tune that's the problem, and all that and the melodyne and just
don't
yeah.
tell that
Yeah.
to Nate. He loves autotune.
Well, there's nothing wrong with it there's nothing wrong with it if you're trying to create a cool vocal effect, but when you douse everything in auto tune, it's like
Yeah. Yeah. Riley, thoughts on "With Me Tonight"?
I like it. It's a very it's just a very cool song. It's a very chill song. I really liked the organ on the Smile version. I kind of wish they included that on this one. But as an acapella piece, it's probably one of my favorites. Maybe my favorite acapella piece by the band. I like it.
All right, so up next is "Wind Chimes." So of all the Smile Sessions songs that were included on Smiley Smile, this one is maybe like the most drastically different sounding arrangement to me. The original Smile version starts out sounding pretty light and breezy. You have like the sound of the marimbas and Brian's vocal, but then it gets into that more heavy and driving second section. But the Smiley Smile version is significantly slower and also a lot creepier. It also has a pretty stripped back arrangement of mostly just like organ and piano, and some really haunting vocals as well. All of that said, this might be my hot take of the episode, but I actually do prefer this Smiley Smile version of the song to the Smile version, which I think is good, but it also hasn't clicked with me in the way that some of the other Smile material has. So this Smiley Smile recording does stick with me for how haunting and unsettling it sounds. And it's another one of the songs in the album that I come back to the most. So I think it's a really, really cool track that is honestly very creepy. One of the more creepier sounding songs in the Beach Boys catalog with the very like breathy vocals. Very cool song.
yeah, it's a great song. What I love about this is I like how everybody gets a piece to sing. I really like that. It's always fun to kind of listen to you trying to pick out everybody's parts. I know Dennis is the close your eyes and lean back. But yeah, I think that the breathy vocals work really good here, especially because it's a song about wind chimes and the wind has a breeze. Yeah, as far as do I like it better than the Smile version? I'd say they're about even for me. It's another song that, yeah, I don't like love the song either. Like, yeah, I know you mentioned that it's not like a song that's like one of my absolute favorites in the catalog, but I do enjoy it for what it is, and I do like the vibe of this song, and it's definitely one that I always look forward to listening to when I spin the record. Yeah, it's a pretty cool track.
I think this one was rewritten in a minor key. I don't know. bigger music nerd than me could probably let me know. But yeah, dude, it's freaking creepy. I got really creeped out the first time I listened to it. And I wasn't even high, like with Surf's Up. Just happened. Yeah, it's cool though. Again, like this album impresses me more than I actually like it. And I think the fact that they can take what was honestly a pretty relatively upbeat song on Smile and just make it something like this, it's pretty damn impressive. But I don't really listen to this one that much. It's probably middle of the pack, closer to the lower songs from in the album, but I still enjoy it as is. I think it's funny that the album was used to like help people on LSD cool down. And like this is one of the songs, and Fall Breaks Back into Winter, two of the creepiest songs in the entire catalog. And like, oh yeah, this is gonna help me cool down. I would freak the fuck out. I would start seeing crazy shit.
I was gonna say, yeah, this wouldn't make me come down. This would make me come back up. I mean, like, this would just get me back on my trip. Yeah, so it's a very creepy song, but also a very cool song for sure. So, all right. So up next, we have another pretty quirky one, "Getting Hungry." So this is another one of the songs that did not originate from the Smile sessions, and it's also one of the weirder songs on the album. It kind of switches back and forth abruptly between the slow verse section, sung by Mike, to the more energetic and organ-heavy chorus section. I can appreciate some of the quirky elements of the song, and I do like Mike's vocal during the verses. But as a whole, I can't say that this one does too much for me, and I honestly don't think that it works as well as it could have. I personally think it would have sounded better if it had been given kind of more of an upbeat arrangement and maybe included on the band's next album, Wild Honey. I also wanted to mention that the Faces attempted to do more of like an R&B style cover of this song in the studio in the early 70s. And I actually think that their arrangement suits this song much better than the original Beach Boys version. Mike Love also attempted a version of this on his Celebration album, which was his side project in the late 70s, where they made this song in kind of a disco, more of a disco version, which I think kind of works but kind of doesn't. But if any of our listeners haven't heard the Faces version, definitely check that out because I think this song really works well with their arrangement. But yeah, overall, in terms of the Beach Boys recording, I think this is one of those tracks that works okay in the context of Smiley Smile, but it's definitely one of the lesser tracks on the album for me. And I wouldn't have really minded if this one had stayed in the vault for many years or passed over. Also, a very baffling choice for a single as well. I think this was released as a Brian and Mike single. I don't really think it's that commercial.
Solo single, right?
Solo single, yep.
Brian and Mike. Yeah, by far my least favorite song on this. I don't think it's well written. I hate the way it's mixed because it's like quiet and all of a sudden it gets like freaking loud all of a sudden.
So jarring.
And like I don't know, it's just like I just don't like it very much. And it's like I don't like how the way the organ sounds on it either. I think it sounds really annoying to me. It just does not for me. This is one of those songs that does not work for me at all. I just don't really care for it. And it is by far my least favorite cut on here. It's not even close. Yeah, I've just never really cared for it. And again, why it was released as a single is beyond me, but this band makes a ton of baffling choices, so this is just yet another baffling choice.
I'm quite a fan of the Celebration version, and I'm quite a fan of the Faces version too. But what the fuck is this? It's fine, I guess. It's just I've always kind of seen it as like in terms of the Smiley Smile version, one of the most lazy Brian and Mike tunes ever. I think they really just threw this one together. It's not like Good Vibrations when you like mishmash two different like things together. This is just two random verses and choruses thrown together, and it's kind of expected to work. I just see it kind of as like a songwriting exercise. It's pretty lazy, I think. However, I think if the energy was really broad, it could have been something cool. I think maybe it was like kind of half finished and was kind of written at the tail end of the album. And I could see it. Like Jake actually said, I was thinking this for a while. I think if they like reworked it or added a couple of parts to it, it could have worked really well as like a soulful song on Wild Honey. But it just seems half finished.
Yeah.
As is, it seems pretty lazily written.
Yeah, that's what frustrates me about it the most, honestly, is like I actually don't think like I think the issue with the song is the arrangement. I think even like in its current form where it kind of has like, kind of like the jarring transition from the verses to the chorus, I think that with the right arrangement, it works because
That's why I think the Celebration version works, because I think the verses go a lot better with the chorus. I think that the energy was brought to the verses. You're just like Mike kind of gives that like swaggy vocal in the Celebration version. It's like in the morning. Na, 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 na. And that was like pretty cool.
And then
here it's just really lazy and it's just like it's tired and slow. It's
Right. And then in the Faces version, you got like that real cool organ playing during the verses, and then the chorus comes in and it just kicks ass. And you got
Right.
Rod singing the hell out of it. He's like, getting hungry. Like
Ron Wood on guitar was freaking killer. It's just, I
yeah.
think if it was had a different arrangement, I think it would have worked much better with Wild Tawny. You take out, um, what the fuck's that song? That little Mama says at the end, and you just throw
Yeah.
on Getting Hungry or something at the very end with like a much more like heavy arrangement, and it would have been much better.
Yeah, and have like Carl do the lead. You know, Carl had those real like soulful vocals. Like
I'm getting
wild.
hungry.
Yeah.
I can hear him like really belting that out.
Yeah. All right, so the next track on the album is Wonderful. And of course, this is another one of the Smile Session songs. But this is another one that has a very drastically different sounding arrangement. On the original Smile version, the song is more of a Baroque arrangement with the harpsichord and trumpet. But on this version, most of the instrumentation is just organ and piano. And there's also a short interlude halfway through the song that's not in the original Smile version. In terms of my thoughts on the Smiley Smile recording, I think it works okay in the context of the album, and it fits in fine with more of like the stripped back sound of the record. But compared to the Smile Sessions version, I think that this really pales in comparison. For me, the harpsichord and the Baroque arrangement is the main appeal of the Smile version for me. So not having it here definitely makes the song less interesting for me. I also could live without the little interlude in the middle, where the guys are kind of just like talking and laughing. I don't hate it, but I also don't think that it adds anything to the song, so I could go without that. But yeah, overall, I don't think that this is a bad rendition of the song, and I think that Carl gives it a decent vocal. But it just doesn't do that much for me, and this is one of the tracks that I don't really revisit outside of the album. So, what do you guys think of the Smiley Smile version of Wonderful?
It's very creepy, first of all. You got that like kind of like the vocals going high with the what do you call it, the phase shifting again. Yeah, I'm a big Smiley Smile guy in general, but yeah, this is one where a Smile hands down clears. That one is just a beautiful Baroque masterpiece. Honestly, it's such a beautiful song. It's got the harpsichord, it's got the beautiful Brian vocal. This just feels almost like you're sitting in a room with a bunch of creeps surrounding you. I guess I can kind of appreciate it for that, but yeah, I don't think it really works. And yeah, that weird like almost like I don't know. It almost sounds like background noise. Like the hey wah wah woo, wah 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 wah. I don't know what the hell that's supposed to be, but yeah, I appreciate it for what it is, and I think it's fine in the context of the record. But if I was showing this song to someone and they were not familiar with it, hands down, I'm playing the Smile version. That's one that's much.
Yeah, it's either this one or Wind Chimes that had the minor chord switch to a minor chord progression or whatever. I don't freaking know. Music nerds could probably help me out there. The right music guys could get me there. Um, yeah, again, like what the fuck? This is creepy as hell, man. Like what the hell happened? Again, like beautiful on the Smiley Smile or the Smile version where it's like lush and orchestral and like Baroque. And I could easily see like a band like the Left Bank doing it or whatever. And
Mm.
then like what the fuck is this? And like, what were they smoking? That's some crazy shit. Um, I like it. It's just again, it's just more creepy, but again, very inventive. Very cool that they could rewrite their own song and make it this creepy.
This is one of those ones where I do think if the Smile version didn't exist, I could probably appreciate this more. But like knowing that Smile version and the arrangement, like with the harpsichord and everything, like that's just so much better than this to me. Like this is like it's cool in the context of the album and it definitely fits in better than that version would have on here. But like, man, I always come back to that version compared to this one. So all right. So to close out Smiley Smile, we have Whistle In. Yeah. So this is the last track in the album, and it's also the final one that doesn't seem to really have any direct connection to the Smile Sessions. Musically, this is a pretty simple song. It's pretty much just the same verse line repeated multiple times, along with some piano and some added backing vocals from the guys. It's memorable enough for me that I can remember how it goes. Like, remember the day, remember the night. Like, it is pretty catchy. And it's also short enough that it doesn't really outstay its welcome for me. But I will say that it is kind of a strange way to close out the album. I feel like this maybe would have worked better if it had been placed at the end of side one or as an interlude in between other tracks in the album. That said, it's definitely not the worst Beach Boys album closer, and this is one that I actually do have on my Beach Boys playlist and will listen to it if it comes on. So I think it's a fun little track, but I do wish that the band had maybe done a little more with it because I would have liked to have heard what it would have sounded like with a more kind of like full arrangement. So.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice song. I really like Carl's vocal on it. But I definitely agree with you. I think it just needs a little bit more. But I do think it's a nice way to close off the album. I think it's a good kind of like something to leave you with, something to remember you by this record, right? And it's a good, kind of got that nice trippy vibe to it, you know, remember the day, remember the night. But imagine if this was just a little bit more fleshed out. I think you'd have a top tier Beach Boys song. But as it stands, it's a nice little fragment of a song.
Yeah, the medley, the not the medley, the melody is actually pretty strong. I kind of wish they kept with it and fleshed it out a lot more. Put it on a Wild Honey or something, but they
Yep.
needed 12 songs, so I could easily see why they kind of just tossed this together. But if this is what they can toss together within the span of like a couple of minutes, holy shit. I
Yeah.
like it. It's not long enough, not fleshed out enough.
All right. So now, do we want to get into a couple of the extra tracks that were recorded around this time that are not necessarily Smile songs? We will get into Smile at some point in the future.
Sure.
Couple
So
of years.
there are two songs that we wanted to talk about. So the first one we're going to talk about is a song called "You're Welcome." Now that was the B side to the Heroes.
Hero. Yeah.
One of a handful of B sides that was only a B side because the Beach Boys don't actually have too many of those. This one is just kind of like a crescendoing chant. It basically is just like, you're welcome to come, and just kind of repeats for about a minute and a half. I think it's fine for what it is, but it's very obvious why this was a B-side. I can't really see this fitting in on any album. Maybe if it was fleshed out a little bit more with something. I do kind of like the reverb on it. I do like that it kind of has like that crescendoing build up, and I kind of like the timpani or whatever. But like I said, it's just for me, it's like I said, it's a B-side. I can definitely see why it was a B-side. It doesn't really stick out as like being like an absolute highlight of anything, but I don't think it's a terrible song either. So that's where I'm at with You're Welcome.
I kind of like it as a ending to Smile, honestly. I mean, I know we're not going to talk about it too much, and I don't really want to. Um, but yeah, for like the big album that Smile was supposed to be, if it started with Our Prayer, I can see why this would be a great ending to that album, and I can understand it being like an ending to Heroes and Villains. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, for me, kind of what you guys said. I think it's a cool little fragment, but it's not really that much more than that. I think it could have worked as like an interlude in between tracks on Smiley Smile if, like Matt said, maybe they'd fleshed it out a little bit more. But I don't really care that it wasn't included, so it doesn't really bother me at all. And in terms of like song fragments, I definitely prefer something like Whistling to this. So I
Yeah.
think it's fine as a B side, but it's definitely a B side. So all right, Matt, did you want to also get into Can't Wait Too Long?
Yeah, so Can't Wait Too Long. I know that this was a song that kind of was kicking around for a little bit.
Yeah, it was kicking around for since like the very tail end of like Smile or middle of Smiley Smile.
Yes, so this song was started in October of 67. It was never finished, of course.
Kind of.
There's a couple of different mixes of it. The first time that this song actually appeared, it was first officially released on the 1990 dual CD of Smiley Smile Wild Honey Twofer, the Twofer. Um, I think personally this is a beautiful track. I think it's got a really nice melody to it. The vocals are really beautiful. You know, it's got the do 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 do. I miss you, darling. I miss you so hard. I really think there's something really, really, really interesting here. I really just wish it was finished because I think this is really something special. I've always loved this one ever since the first time I heard it. I just think it's got a great psychedelic vibe to it. I love the harmonies on it. And I just really wish they'd fleshed it out and finished it. I definitely like, this could have definitely gotten released on something, but I'm at least happy that we at least got it, even if it's in an unfinished state.
We got versions of it, yeah. There's one particular like section of the quote unquote finished piece that I really like. It's where the guitar goes "Beow, do, 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 do." That's my favorite part of the song. It's like a solid like 2.5 minutes. And it kind of goes into that "I miss you, darling" part. But yeah, similar to Smile, this wasn't very finished, and I like that there's a lot of different like mixes you can find out there by a lot of like hardcore fans, ranging from like 3 minutes to like 10 minutes per usual, as with many Beach Boys songs that fans mix up. But I really like it, and I think this is kind of Brian's last ditch effort at a little pocket at his little pocket symphony style that he wouldn't return to for a long time. So I do quite like it. But I think it was kind of showed Brian that that kind of era for him was kind of over.
Yeah. Very hauntingly beautiful song, especially like the opening with those vocal harmonies. I mean, those are like some of the prettiest harmonies in the catalog in terms of their vocals, like really, really beautiful. Like you guys said, like the "I miss you, darling" part, cool. definitely not finished for sure. You can tell that this needed a lot more fleshing out. But what is there, I really do like. And this is one of those ones I really would have loved to have heard what this would have sounded like had it been completed, because I really think they had something really cool here. So really cool track. All right, so now to close out the episode, do we want to talk a little bit about the commercial and critical reception of this album, Matt? Because I know this was an album that was very polarizing at the time, but people have started to come around on it more over the past few decades.
Sure. So this album was released on September 18th, 1967. When it came out, it didn't really do that great in the United States. It peaked at number 41, which I believe was at the time their lowest peaking studio album, or damn near it. Much better in the UK. It peaked at number 9 in the UK. As we had mentioned before, Carl had said that this album was more of a bunt than a grand slam. Not a blunt, a bunt.
It was
They were using a bong in the beginning of Little Pad, so it's definitely.
Yeah, so some of the initial reviews, journalist Nick Kent said Smiley Smile appeared like the single most underwhelming musical statement of the 60s. It was a major disappointment to fans. A lot of people just didn't get it. They didn't understand it. They wanted Heroes or Smile. They didn't get Smile. They got this instead. Melody Maker called it undoubtedly the worst album ever released by the Beach Boys. Prestige has been seriously damaged. Hit Parader praised the album for probably having more a cappella harmony than on any album since the fall of the singing group era in the late 1950s, but they still liked Pet Sounds better. Enemy wrote, by the standards which this group has set itself, it's more than a grade disappointing. High Fidelity said they are making the psychedelic route, perhaps in the unforgettable city of Fresno. Until they reach the San Francisco Bay Bridge or return to the shores of Malibu, their work can only receive partial approval. There were some more favorable reviews around the time. Record Mirrors, Wesley Lane predicted that Smiley Smile would probably go to the top of the LP charts. He felt that it contained better songs on the whole than Pet Sounds, which is an interesting take, as well as extremely clever and insidious production and arrangements that fall into the current psychedelic bag without being blatantly acidy. The Milwaukee Sentinel praised the LP as probably the most valuable contribution to rock since Revolver, and for being unlike anything the Beatles had ever done. New York Times ruled that the album is a memorable, if disjointed, experience, and a truly religious one as well. One must decide for oneself what the sermon is worth listening for. And Kraskaw, when he wrote for Esquire, he said that he praised the minimalism of Smiley Smile, characterizing the record as slight and calling the deliberately uncommercial sound of the album unique and almost perfect. So very mixed reviews when it came out. In more recent years, much more critical acclaim. So I wanted to say that some people have said that this album has been used in drug clinics to get people come down from highs. Interesting. AllMusic gave it a 4 out of 5. Blender gave it a 5 out of 5. Pitchfork gave it a 9.5 out of 10. They deemed it a near masterpiece. Without any awareness of Smile's existence, this album could have been a contemporary classic. And although the album isn't anywhere close to the sonic revolution that Sgt. Pepper had already brought, Wilson's innovative production and arrangements still bring out the best in every track. Blender said it's the boy psychedelic album, joltingly spare, druggy, and funny, with the most gorgeous harmonies of their career. Kreisgaw for Rolling Stone did a list of the 40 most essential albums of 1967, and he picked this one as one of the 40 most essential albums of 1967. And in his review, he said, in the year of Peppermania, the Beach Boys' Smile was expected to gallop out of the West and reclaim the honor of rock for its nation of origin. But Smile didn't materialize until 2004, stitched together from old bits and pieces and revived as repertory by his solo Brian Wilson and his enablers. Instead, Wilson retreated into his lonely room and oversaw this hastily recorded half measure. A bunt instead of a grand slam, groused Brother Carl. Towering it's not. Some kind of hit it is. Without this product on demand, we'd lack such impossible trifles as the wiggy She's Going Bald, the potted little pad, and Fall Breaks and Back to Winter, a transitional bagatelle featuring Squeeze Box and Imitation Woodpecker. This album has also been cited as being very influential for a lot of lo-fi bedroom pop. Pitchfork contributor Mark Richardson wrote that the record basically invented the kind of lo-fi bedroom pop that would later propel Sebadoh, Animal Collective, and other characters. And the New York Observer's Ron Hart wrote that Smiley Smile had effectively presaged the work of Harry Nilsson, Stereolab, the High Llamas, the Olivia Tremor Control, and Father John Misty. Other admirers of the album have included Pete Townsend of The Who and Robbie Robertson of the band. XTC's Andrew Partridge considered it one of the most influential records for me, and it was a direct inspiration for his song Season Cycle on the Skylarking album. In an interview with Time, Steven Tyler of Aerosmith stated that his island music picks included Smiley Smile just for the melodic fuck all. Um, Kichi Suzuki and Hirokazu Tanaka, composers for the Japanese role-playing video game series Mother, cited Smiley Smile among influences on the game's soundtrack. So this was an album that, when it came out in 1967, it confused a lot of people, both critics and fans, but it really did find an audience, and it became very highly influential. Even out, we needed all the Smile stuff, and I think for me, that's what makes this album so special. It is such a vibe record. I don't think there's too many records that really sound like it. I mean, sure, there's a lot of stuff that sounds like bedroom pop, but this also has the humor. This has like almost sounds like they're high recording it.
Right.
Sounds like, they just don't give a fuck. We're just trying something new. And I just love this record so much. I'm very glad we have it. I love the cover too. I think this is one of my all-time favorite Beach Boys covers. I love it. Yeah, I think I've said everything I can about Smiley Smile. It's a great record for me.
Dude, imagine Pet Sounds coming out in 1966 and like Good Vibrations comes out like right after that. And then they drop She's Going Bald. Like,
Oh my God, yeah.
I could totally see why this was a flop for them. Like I could totally see why. Like holy shit. That would have been the ultimate mind fuck. You're like, all right, let's go, new Beach Boys. What the fuck did I just listen to? I would, yeah, I could totally see why nobody fucked with this album when it came out. What the fuck is this?
But again, as the UK, as is shown over the years with the UK, they did buy it because it went top 10 over there. So they really they respected the the experimentation and kind of like the unique sound that the band was transitioning into, from Pet Sounds and onwards. So
I think what also helped with the UK was that around so when it comes to the Beach Boys in the UK, Surfin' Safari came out in 1963, didn't do anything. Then they didn't put out another album for a while. And so like around 67, a lot of their back catalog was starting to be released. Surfer Girl, Surf's Up, not Surf's Up, Surfing USA. And this came along with it. So likely, I think they were just so hungry for product, they went out and bought it. In the States, I think, it didn't get really marketed very well. People kind of forgot about it. And like I mentioned before, the Beach Boys were seen as lame and out of it. People just kind of slept on it. But there are certain artists that you listen to now, and it's like, I wonder where they got their sound from.
Right. I also think like one other thing that's worth mentioning about this album too, and like kind of like the negative response at the time is like I feel like a lot of it has to do with the fact that like there was so much hype around the Beach Boys and especially Brian Wilson around that time, like the whole Brian's a genius thing, I know Derek Taylor kept pushing that, like to it was kind of a way of like separating the band from like their early image. I think Brian was kind of getting fed up with people just viewing them as like, that surf band, so I think like, Brian is a genius. He is a musical genius, and the guy's written some of the most incredible music of all time. But it also built up a lot of hype. And then when the band failed to deliver that, promised masterpiece and delivered this instead, I think that like critics just like attacked it for that reason, because there was so much hype around the band with Pet Sounds and everything. So yeah, it's one of those albums where I think the response to it has a lot to do with kind of, all the hype around Brian at the time and just the high expectations from the press with all these people comparing them to the Beatles, like, oh, they're competing, But yeah, this was definitely kind of the turning point where like the Beatles kind of took the torch in terms of like, the band that always had the commercial and critical respect. So,
yeah, I don't think, honestly, there's not too many other artists that I think had that combination of critical acclaim and commercial success that the Beatles did.
Yep.
The closest I could maybe think of was Prince around the time of Purple Rain. Maybe Nirvana too with Nevermind. There's only a handful of artists that really probably had like the mix of both,
Right. Before we wrap up, I did want to mention a few quotes from the members of the band about Smiley Smile and just some of their thoughts on it. So shortly after the album came out, Mike said that Smiley Smile had baffled and mystified the public and that the band had this feeling that we were going too far, losing touch, I guess, which I think kind of sums up, kind of their feelings around the time. It was like the band kind of having a loss of direction around that time. A few other quotes. Bruce Johnson said, this was in retrospect years later, Bruce said that it was 1,000 times better than the original Smile. It's just the most underrated album in the whole catalog for me, which is interesting because Bruce was really not that involved with this. I think around this time he was kind of distancing himself a little bit because like a lot of the members were kind of like, experimenting a lot with drugs and stuff. And Bruce wasn't really into that whole scene. So he kind of distanced himself a bit from the album. Dennis said that it was not as ambitious as Pet Sounds was, but I listened to it in a jungle in Africa and it sounded great. And then Mike said years later, some of the songs we recorded could barely be called songs. They were chants, spacey fragments, weird sound effects. Every group produces at least one bad album. I don't think Brian wants to be associated with it either, which I think is an interesting quote. But I can also see where Mike is coming from with some of that. So, yeah, just thought I'd share a few extra comments from members of the band over the years. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this 42nd episode of Good Timin. Hope you all enjoyed the show. It was a lot of fun talking about Smiley Smile with you guys, and I'm excited to discuss the band's other late 60s albums in the coming weeks. So, as always, if you like this podcast and want to hear more, feel free to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. We greatly appreciate the support as it motivates us to make more episodes in the future. Also, as a reminder, the Good Timin podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So there's plenty of different places to listen and keep up with the show. So thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.